Welcome back to MGBs and other stuff. Howdy folks, and welcome back to my channel. I know it's been a while. I was trying to get this video out a few weeks ago, but you know that old saying, life is what happens to you while you're busy making other plans. Well, I'm finally here though, and Iris is back on the road, and I'm going to share with you how I got it there. So the first thing we're going to do is talk about the master cylinders and the kit, the rebuild kit, how I got them installed and all that sort of stuff. Then I'm going to talk about the spin-on oil adapter, the inverted type. I've replaced it and I've figured out what was wrong with the other one. And the last thing I'm going to do is just something quick. I changed the heater pipe over, and I'm just going to show you how that went as well. So in the last video, Master Cylinders Part 1, we took apart the master cylinders and looked at all the different parts and the different kits for them. And so I've already reassembled the clutch master cylinder, and really the only difference is on these types of master cylinders for this year of car is that the clutch master cylinder doesn't have a valve assembly, but it does have the boot, the secondary cap, the piston washer, and the main cap, but the clutch again doesn't have the valve assembly as the brake does. But the way they all go back together is exactly the same. So I started with the boot, and it's actually pretty tough to get on. The one that came off was much larger and much more pliable and much more rubbery. But these ones that come with the new kits are very stiff, and the hole that goes through the top of the push rod, I think that's like a clevis there where the pedal attaches. It's kind of difficult to get it through there, but I found if you got like a chopstick and put it in one of the holes of the clevis and pulled it back, and then I got a screwdriver, put it in the other hole and pulled it back. But you just want to be really gentle because you don't want to tear them or rip them or score them at all. So they're a little bit awkward to get on, but once they're on and they're undamaged, you're good to go. So the next thing I installed was what they call the secondary cap, and that goes on the piston. And again, it's a pretty stiff little seal, and it was quite a chore to get on. Some people soak them in the brake fluid before trying to assemble them. I found it to be a little too slippery to do that, so I kind of worked it on dry, and before I put it in its final position, I painted the piston with some brake fluid and the seal with some brake fluid, and then pushed it home into place. It's really just a matter of trial and error. Again, I used the chopstick and sort of got one end over, trying to hold the other side down. And then when I got it in position, I got the little screwdriver in and pulled the other side down. Again, you want to be really careful that you don't nick or score these or tear them. If you do, you might as well start over with new seals. And really, for the price of the seals themselves, the kits, it's not a bad idea to order a couple of sets just in case you do tear one. Then at least you'll have a replacement and you don't have to wait for the parts to come in again. So now I've got the secondary cap just sitting on the around the perimeter of the top of the piston. That would be the push rod end, and I'm going to paint it up with some brake fluid, and I'll paint the piston itself where the seal is actually going to engage with the piston, so that there's brake fluid between the piston and the seal. The The cap itself has like a sleeve in it and a cup on it, and the sleeve engages the entire circumference of the piston, and then the other part of the seal is like a cup, and it prevents the fluid from coming through out the boot and keeps it all within the cylinder bore. I'm going to speed this up a little bit because it is a little bit like watching paint dry. I did notice when I did the clutch master cylinder and changed the secondary cap, once I sort of slid it down onto the piston, I inspected it very carefully and noticed that the sleeve part, the part that sort of really makes all the contact with the piston, had folded over on itself when I slid it down. So I was glad I really took a look at it. I was able to manipulate it so it became fully engaged with it. That way, no leaks. The next thing I assembled was the valve onto the spring. And it's pretty straightforward. It just fits onto the wide end of the spring, and it sits in there pretty snug. Now, the clutch master cylinder doesn't have a valve, at least in these early setups. I'm not sure about the later models, how the clutch and brake assemblies work, but essentially the two kits are the same, except that the clutch master cylinder doesn't have a valve. I'm going to fast forward through some of this. Again, it's not that interesting to watch. So the valve just sits in the end of the spring, and it's the first thing that's going to go down the bore of the master cylinder when you reassemble. Next up is the main cup. And at the end of the spring, the pointy end of the spring, there's a spring retainer clip, and the main cup fits over that. And on the inside of that cup, there's a little nib that will actually go into the center of that little clip. I'm painting it up here with some brake fluid. That'll make it a little easier to get down the bore. I've also painted the inside of the bore with brake fluid, and that just sort of lubricates everything, makes it a little bit easier to install. Sorry I got this out of frame a little bit, but the valve end of the spring went in first, and then the cup went in. Sometimes that cup can get sideways on the way you're down the bore. So I've just used my chopstick and pushing it down sort of evenly on each side until it engages with the spring. The next item is the piston washer, and it just goes on top of the main cup. And I think it's there really to give a little more rigidity to the cup, so when the piston's making contact with it, it doesn't deform it, and may help it last a little longer too. So now it's just a matter of putting the piston in. Piston has two ends, the flat end which engages with the main cup and the piston washer, and the other end which is where the secondary cap went, and then the push rod engages there. So the surface of the end that sticks out has got a cup in it, and the surface of the push rod has a ball in it, so it acts like a joint. So I've painted this up with some more brake fluid to make it a little easier to go in. And then the next step is sort of getting the push rod ready to go in. I find with the boot on it, it sort of makes it difficult to get the circlip in there because the boot's always falling forward. So I'll show you how I just sort of wired it up with some wire and to keep it out of the way, and then the assembly went together completely. So as I mentioned before, the push rod has a rounded end like a ball, and it fits into the socket of the top of the piston. And where my fingers are on my right hand is where the pedal actually attaches, pushes that push rod back and engages the piston and puts fluid through the system. So the piston has to go in straight as an arrow, and that's why that's a ball joint there. So I put some grease on that ball joint just to make sure that there wasn't any resistance and that it was free to move and wouldn't make any squeaky noises. So I think that's probably a good practice. The boot will go over and cover that whole assembly anyways. So I'm trying to get the piston down with the push rod. You can do it separately, but the spring keeps pushing the piston back up. So sometimes it's easier to get it all in one piece. But the boot keeps slipping down on me, and I can't get to the circlip with the circlip pliers. So I'll show you what I did. I just wired the boot out of the way and was able to get it completed. I'm going to fast forward through much of this. Again, it's like watching paint dry, but I'm pretty sure you get the idea. Well, that's the brake master cylinder all put back together. Seems to be working smoothly. Get the boot back down around the end of the bore and then back to Iris to get this installed and get back on the road, hopefully sooner than later. So you'll see here that I've painted up the pedal box and the pedal box cover. I got all the rust off them. I gave them a good base coat of primer and then a couple of coats of a hard enamel black paint, a gloss paint, which was pretty close to what they were. I didn't spend a lot of time trying to make them perfect. I wanted them to look like they had been around for a while, because they have been around for a while. You also notice that I got the paint all off the master cylinders themselves. Decided not to paint them or get them all shiny, just leave them in their original condition. I may once in a while get out and put some penetrating oil on them just to keep the rust off them. We'll see how it works. I may have to end up taking them off and painting them again, but for now I'm going to leave them as is. So this was my first attempt at installing the master cylinders. And because I was having such a tough time getting my flare nut wrenches in there to get the brake line and the clutch line off while the pedal box was still in place, I thought, well, I'll just install the master cylinders. Gives me lots of wiggle room to get the wrenches in there, get them tightened down, and then I can get the pedal box in there and attach the cylinders to the pedal box. But as it turned out, it wasn't the right road to go down. It was just too much finagling to try and get the pedal box in there, get the bolts through and the nuts on. So I abandoned this method and decided to install the cylinders back onto the pedal box, and then that gave me still lots of wiggle room to get the brake lines on and the clutch line on with the flare nut wrenches. So I'm going to speed up this video a little bit. It's just the master cylinders getting attached to the pedal box, to nuts, to bolts, to lock washers on for each master cylinder. I found this way worked well. Was able to get the master cylinders attached, and then when I went to install the pedal box, I was able to get the brake line and the clutch line in and get my wrench in there and get those snug before I actually physically attached the pedal box to the car. I did order all the seals for the pedal box. There's one that goes underneath the cover, and then there's one that goes, you can see it installed there by my right hand. It's like a piece of weather stripping, really, that goes between the pedal box and the cover. There's supposedly one that goes under the pedal box. When I removed this one, there was some sort of substance in there. I don't know what was used, maybe some sort of gasket material. I didn't bother. I probably should have. I could have bought some cork and did a cork seal there, but everything seems to be working fine and in there nice and secure. So I'm pleased with the way it turned out. So now I'm going to install the pedal box with the master cylinders already attached to it. It goes on, I think it's called the heater shelf. That's that piece of metal that the body trim that the heater sits on. I cleaned it up really well. There wasn't any damage. The paint was still good. So the brake fluid hadn't eaten through it yet, which was good. So I just made sure it was nice and clean. I was able to sort of finagle again that pedal box into position and then just finger tighten the flare nuts for the brake line and the clutch line. And then I had enough wiggle room to get in there with the wrench and get those tightened. So I'm going to fast forward through some of these spots where it's just tightening nuts and bolts. If there's anything interesting that comes up, though, I'll stop and explain what I'm doing. So I've got the brake line and the clutch line secure. I'm going to install the pedal box cover seal. This needs to go in now before you bolt the pedal box to the heater shelf, only because two of the bolts that fasten the pedal box down actually pass through that seal. There's 6 bolts altogether. One of them is larger than the other 5, and some of them are a little awkward, especially on the wing side or the fender side to get to, so you'll need a ratchet with an extension. But other than that, it's pretty straightforward. I'm going to fast forward through some of the bolt tightening process. Not very exciting, but I did actually found the more light you can get on the situation, the easier this all is. Oops, I forgot to mention the 2 pointed bolts, and these you access in the footwell of the driver's side, and there's 2 bolts that go into the back of the pedal box. Now the one on the left is a little longer because it also goes through a little clip that holds the wiring harness that goes up by it. The other one is a little shorter and it goes right in. You may want to put these in first and then put in all the ones on the heater shelf. I was lucky they were all lined up for me, so they just went straight in. And then as we go to this next shot, you can see the springs that attach to the pedals and the two bolts in place. So that's it. That's the brake line attached, the clutch line attached, master cylinders are in, and the pedal box is attached. Now it's time to put the pedals back in. So now it's finally time to get the pedals back in, and I'm going to show you how I did it. It seemed to work out okay, so I thought I'd share it with you. So I've already installed the brake pedal, and I am just going to hang the clutch pedal off the clevis end of the push rod. So just a matter of getting it down into place, putting the clevis pin in and a cotter pin, and then it'll just hang there. I found this easier to do than trying to put it in as a unit with the bolt that goes through both pedals and the spacer and all that sort of stuff. So it's much easier to do it with the pedals hanging off those clevises. I'm going to speed this up a little bit. I didn't mention this before, but before I hung the pedals in, I made sure that I really greased up the bushes in each pedal. So this is what an assembled pedal assembly looks like, the clutch and the brake. Clutch is on the top and the brake is on the bottom. So there's a bolt that goes through, then there's a washer on the inside of each pedal, and then there's a spacer tube, which is really important, that goes in between those washers, and then just really a nut and a lock washer on the other end. There is also those bushes in there that you want to be cognizant of and get some grease in there. So this video is getting a little longer than I expected, so I'm going to fast forward the assembly here. I will tell you though that the first time I did it, I had it all completed and I went down to in the footwell to attach the springs and noticed that there was a bush down there. So one of the bushings had fallen out on my first attempt to assemble this. The next step was to attach the springs, so you can see them here in their final configuration. So one more step before I bleed the brakes is to ensure that that spacer tube doesn't move. It should be firm in between the two pedals. And so just a pair of vice grips, not so tight that you're going to crush the tube, but firm enough on there that when you move the vice grips up and down, that tube isn't going to move with them. If it is too loose, you just need to tighten up the nut on the bolt that runs through both pedals. So that's it. I waited to put the pedal box cover on until after I had bled the brakes. I actually flushed the system. So it was all new brake fluid and clutch fluid all the way through. They're both working really well. I also ordered a new cap that was the original style, and I aged it to match the look of the master cylinders. I wonder if you can tell which one is the new one and which one is the old one. So just wanted to give you a quick update on the inverted spin-on oil filter adapter. Got the old one off. The only issue really was the that little O-ring seal, or big O-ring seal, was a little difficult to get out, but I eventually got it out. And definitely the issue was cross thread, where the filter screws on to the adapter. It was in pretty bad shape there. And that's why it was spewing out so much oil. So this is the new adapter that I purchased. I also got a new copper washer, new bolt, new O-ring seal, and it all seems like it's pretty good quality, so I'm pleased with that.
Did it go blank?
I really thought it was going to be a bigger job than it turned out to be. I was able to do most of it from the top of the car, and really only went under to tighten that bolt, and didn't even have to jack up the car. I was able to get my arm up there with an extension on my ratchet and get it in. So I've already put the seal in here, given it some oil, and just working this down in and finding the hole that the bolt goes in, and finger tightened it, and we were all set to go. So this was the best part, was starting the car. I'm outside at the remote control, or the remote starter, and yeah, granted the car was already warmed up a bit, but I was really happy to see the oil pressure go up and rest there, and no leaks and no drips. So one last thing, just a quick update. I mentioned on the last video that I was going to change the copper heater return pipe, only because the one that was existing was sort of all bent and corroded. So pretty simple process, just a couple of bolts on the top of the intake manifold that have clips on them that hold the pipe, and two hose clamps. Was pretty difficult though getting the pipe out of the hoses. They'd been in there a long time, but I eventually got them out. And the other one just slipped right in and tightened it up. I'm going to show you a picture of it. I forgot to take a video of it after I had installed it, so I'll just take a picture of it and post it at the end of this little clip. And then hopefully my next video is just going to be driving, because I've been dying to get out and drive this. I've had it out for a few test drives. About 40 minutes is the longest I've been, and everything seems good. So I think I'm ready for an adventure. While I'm here, I just wanted to mention how disappointed I am really with the little rubber ends on the braided fuel lines are holding up. I put these brand new in last spring, and the rubber bits are already cracking and breaking away. Well folks, that's it for me today. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please consider liking and subscribing. There'll be more videos coming, hopefully nothing to do with repairs. That's not likely though. But at any rate, I'll post some more videos in the near future. Thanks for watching.